We're ready to navigate. In this video, you're going to learn how to create a navigation graph for the Trivia app. Add the title screen and the game screen, connect them with an action, and navigate to the game screen when the play button is pressed. I've already added the navigation library Gradle dependencies, so we'll begin by creating the navigation graph, which is stored in a resource, just like the images, strings, and styles.
To add a graph to the project, right-click on the Res folder and select New, Android Resource File, and then, in the New Resource dialog, select the navigation resource type, and give the resource a name like Navigation. Now we need to give navigation control over which fragment is displayed in the activity. Navigation provides its own fragment, called the navhost fragment, which acts as a host for each one of the fragments in the activity navigation graph. As the user moves between destinations within the navigation graph for the activity, the navhost fragment swaps the fragments in and out as necessary, and automatically creates and manages the appropriate fragment backstack. So, the next task is to add the navhost fragment to our activity main layout. We already have a fragment defined there, so we can just change the class name to androidx.navigation.fragment.navhostFragment. And it should have a different ID, like myNavHostFragment. It needs to know which navigation graph resource to use, so you add the app:"navgraph" attribute and have it point to the navigation graph resource you are using. In our case, navigation. Finally, you set default navhost equals true, which means that this navigation host will intercept the system back key. You have to set this explicitly because you can have multiple simultaneous navigation hosts, and you'd only want one of the nav hosts to handle back. Now, that navigation graph is still empty, so we'll add fragments to the navigation graph. Open the navigation editor by clicking on the navigation resource file and selecting the Design tab. The icon at the top that looks like a plus on a sheet of paper adds a new destination to the graph. Clicking on it displays a menu with all of the activities and fragments in the app. So, we add the title screen fragment. As the first fragment, it will automatically be set as the start destination for the graph, the first screen the user typically sees when entering the graph, and the last screen the user sees before backing out of the app. Running the app now, it once again displays the title screen. The difference now is that you can add navigation that takes the user to another fragment. Returning to the navigation editor, we click the New Fragment button to add the game fragment alongside the title screen fragment. Now we can connect the two fragment destinations with an action. You do that by hovering the mouse over the title fragment and dragging from the connection point to the game fragment. If you run your app again, you'll notice that the behavior hasn't changed. That's because we have an action, but actions alone just represent possible paths through the app when you're at a destination. To actually get the button to do something, you'll need to write some Kotlin code to trigger this specific action, such as creating an on-click listener. To do that, we return to the title fragment code and set the on-click listener for the play button before the end of onCreate view. In Kotlin, we can pass an anonymous function into setOnClickListener. Now for the fun part. We need to actually navigate between our destinations. To do that, we need to find an instance of the navigation controller, which is a class that we use to manage navigation within our navigation host fragment. The navigation host fragment is the parent in the view hierarchy of our current fragment, the title screen fragment. This means that we can traverse up this hierarchy to find the nav host fragment from any view in our fragment, including the play button that we're currently working with. Navigation provides us a helper function called findNavController that takes a view, finds the enclosing navhost fragment, and returns the navigation controller for that navhost fragment. So, you just call navigation.findNavController on the view to get an instance of the navigation controller. Now that we have a navigation controller, we can use it to navigate to the game fragment with the ID of the title fragment to game fragment action. We do this by calling navController navigate r.id action title fragment to game fragment. And that's it. Let's run the app. Pressing the play button, we navigate. We can still do one more thing to make this code just a bit nicer. When I added the navigation dependencies, I added the Kotlin-specific version of navigation, part of a Jetpack project known as Android KTX, which includes extension functions to make Android coding a bit nicer and more idiomatic within Kotlin. Kotlin extension functions allow a class to extend the functionality of an existing class without subclassing it, and KTX has an extension function for the Android View class. So, we can replace navigation.findNavControllerView with view.findNavController. And that's almost it. Navigation can actually create the onClick listener for us. We can replace this anonymous function with the navigation create navigate onClick listener. And that's it. Now we're really done. That was a lot of steps, but we've built a graph, connected it to the UI, and made navigation happen.